So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to pre-think assumptions. My name is Rajat Sudana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Along with me, I have Harsha. Harsha is a senior or principal subject matter expert at e-GMAT, and he's going to be your co-host, as well as Sandeep, who's a GMAT strategy expert, and he is also going to be your co-host today. So the goal of this webinar is to help you or to take you along that journey to achieve 90th percentile on GMAT critical reasoning. And we use a technique called pre-thinking to help you do that. And that's going to be my focus. Now, this is a fairly application-focused webinar, and to make sure that you're well prepared for this webinar, we send a few video lessons your way. If you look at the top left-hand corner, those are the video lessons that ideally you should have done before this webinar. Now, for those of you who haven't done these video lessons, I'll do a brief introduction to what the fundamentals of assumptions are, and then we're going to go from there. But overall, about 70% of the webinar is going to be spent on applying pre-thinking to solve 600 and 700 level questions. We'll solve some really difficult questions, again, with the sole aim to demonstrate how pre-thinking makes learning simple. Okay, again, these lessons are a part of your free trial. Log into your e-GMAT account. I think critical reasoning is the fourth block over there, and you can look at those video lessons. Also, we have some upcoming webinars. So we have a geometry session that's tomorrow. In this session, we focus on quadrilaterals, and we go from the very fundamentals to answering 700 level data sufficiency questions. You need help in quadrilaterals, register for this webinar. You can click on Geo free session and register on this for the same. And then for those of you who need that personalized study plan, who want to know what metrics, actually, let's just ask another question since I have about 100 people here. What's your target GMAT score? Let's get that out of the way. All right. This is about 55 responses. Let's get a few more. I have 101 students here in the webinar. The question is, what's your target GMAT score? All right. So, but almost a majority is in that 730 to 750, almost majority, about 45% of you. Then 26% in the 760 or higher bracket, and then 710 to 720, that's about 23% of you over here. We have a few folks, about 10% in the 660 to 700. So if you want to get to those high scores, you need a definitive study plan. You need metrics to track so that there are a few surprises in the end. You don't want to get to a point where you're 20 days away from the GMAT, you take a mock test, and you find that you're still 100 points away. You don't want to do that. And if you want to make sure that you have a study plan that focuses your energy on the right areas, the areas that will help you improve that score, if you want to get those metrics, then definitely register for the GMAT strategy session. That's number 2 over here, bottom left-hand corner. In this webinar, we're going to talk about how do you build that personalized study plan, how different people need to focus on different areas. And then once you've built that study plan, how do you track that improvement throughout your journey? Okay, I'm going to hide that. And I'm going to hide this one as well. And thank you so much for responding to the poll question. Now, with regards to when do you guys plan to take the test, we can see we have a fairly interesting group. We have about half of you, or I shouldn't say about 40% of you have not taken a date as of yet. Another 20%, upwards of a month and a half. And then we have about 40% of the class in that 15 to 45 day, with about 12 to 13% in each of the brackets out there. So a fairly good mix. I would say this is a pretty a representative mix as to what I would expect around the mid of February. So that's really good. And let's kind of look at it. I had one other poll. I don't want to ask. So this is a poll that I usually ask, which is, what's your preference? Which school? What would you want to? How would you want to take the test? Online GMAT or in-center GMAT, or those of you who I say it could be either. I don't care. All right, so about 66% of you are in that in-center GMAT, about 28% in that online GMAT, and 12%. Again, this is a multiple response, so you could have chosen multiple. So that's why I think the sum adds up to probably more than 100%. Yes, 110% or so. All right, perfect. With that, let me go right into the presentation part. This is what we call as the presentation pod. Here you'd see a presentation and then a Q&A or a question and answer pod right below this. The presentation is something that I'll be talking to, and the Q&A or the question and answer pod is where you can post your questions. So if you have a question due while I'm talking, you can post that question over there. That way either Harsha or Sandeep can get to those questions, and you would you'd essentially be able to you'd be able to get answers, and we'll still finish our session on time. Now, this tough place on the right-hand side is a place for my questions and your answers. So any question that I have, you're going to respond to it on the right-hand pane. Okay, so your questions below the presentation, my questions on the right-hand pane or so. Okay, so by the way, let's ask the first question. How many of you are e-GMAT students, which means paid users? If you're a paid user, select yes. If you're not a paid user, select no. All right, so about 40% of you are paid users, about 60% you're not a paid user or so. Since about significant number of you are not paid users, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend about 5 to 7 minutes talking a bit about e-GMAT, and then we're going to go to the core of this this webinar. Okay, so essentially there are 3 parts to this webinar. In the first part, what just happened? Hold on. Yes, I clicked on the wrong screen. So 3 parts to this webinar. In the first part, I'm going to talk about, your GMAT preparation, a bit about how e-GMAT's different from other test prep options that you might say. That's going to be for about 6 minutes or so. Then we're going to go right into the core of this webinar. It's going to last about 120 minutes. And then towards the end, as I said, if you have questions that do not pertain to critical reasoning or pre-thinking, then I reserve about 20 minutes for those. And any questions that you have about your MBA preparation, admissions, LORs, I'd be happy to answer those as long as they come over here. Okay, we are recording this session. This is live right now, and I know some of you have questions about, hey, will I get the recording if I miss it? Yes, you will still get the recording. On the e-GMAT portal, you'd get a prompt that says, hey, here's a recording, you can watch it here, or in your email as well. Okay, so with that, let's start with the first part over here. So, a decade back when Pyle and I started e-GMAT, by the way, for my background, if you've not connected with us, connect with us on LinkedIn. We are both techies, we are both educators, and we wanted to do something that makes learning more efficient. And as we researched, we kind of found that 2 architectures of learning that existed in overall. That's regardless of whether you look at K-12 learning, whether you look at your college education, whether you look at essentially PhDs or master's education. So one is what we call as a book-based architecture, and the second is a private tutoring-based architecture. A majority of test prep was built around, and even today is still built around this book-based architecture. When we started e-GMAT, we decided to focus us on that private tutoring-based architecture, and since then we've been evolving this architecture by adding more and more capabilities around it. So when you think about e-GMAT versus a bunch of other prep courses, one of the most fundamental differences that exist is the learning architecture that we provide. And it's because of this architecture, some people ask, how is it that you have so many reviews, so much success? The outcome of the difference in architecture is a difference in outcome, which leads to reviews. This is data which represents how many success stories or 700 plus scores, to be very specific, were reported on GMAT Club for various test prep partners. And these are just 4 out of the 12 partners on GMAT Club, but pretty much everyone else had fewer than that 10 number overall. What you really see is 2 companies, Target Test Prep and e-GMAT, accounted for a majority of the success. In fact, about 80% of success. And if you compare us, then this data is only from 1st of January till October of 2015. If you compare us versus TDP, what you'd find is that there's about a 3x or more than a 3x jump. A lot of that was because of the enhancements that we did in the start towards the end of 2020 and all the way into 2021. And because of which we accounted for 55% of all 700 plus scores on GMAT Clever. So in fact, not only that, we accounted for most 730 plus scores and most 100 point score improvements or so. Okay. So just not going to go through that private tutoring based architecture, but I'm just going to give you an introduction to how that leads to personalization, which in turn leads to focus. So if you want to get to that score of 720 or more, which but 80% of the group over here wants to do that, here's how you go about doing this. The first thing you've got to do is essentially you have to create a path towards your goal. So if you are someone who needs help in quant versus verbal, or within verbal, if you need help in SC, you've got to really say, okay, how am I going to improve in SC? Then what am I going to do in CR? And what am I going to do about RC? And then how will quant fit into that score of 720 or higher? So you have to have that vision and that execution overall defined as step number one. Once you have that defined, then for each subsection, you need to have that strategy. And wherever you need to learn concepts, you need to learn those concepts. Not just learning concepts isn't enough. You need to learn how to apply those concepts as well. Why? Because the GMAT is a test of application. And then you need to get so good at applying those concepts in every subsection that you are at a 95th percentile or better. So that's the only way you get to that score of 720 score. Why? Because it represents that percentile, 94th or 95th percentile or so. Okay. So I'm going to take a case study of how we define a path for a particular student who's at a score of 600 to that 720. Okay. The first thing is we've got to figure out what constitutes that 600, which is what we call as, let's quantify your starting abilities. You know, what are your abilities in quant and verbal? Within quant, what are your abilities in number properties, word problems, algebra, and so on and so forth. Within verbal, you know, SCCR, RC. Then using those abilities in an AI engine, we define milestones that ensure or that provide the shortest path to go to that 720 score. And while defining those milestones, we also give you time estimates. And then once you have the starting and the endpoints defined, we then really say, okay, to achieve those milestones, which we defined in step number 2, which aspects of learning and assessments do you need to go through, which metrics do you need to hit, and that's where personalizing course comes in. So how do you get those starting abilities? You know, the best way to do that is either get your ESR if you've taken the GMAT once. ESR is an enhanced score report, or take a Sigma X mock. Why? Because it provides you your starting abilities. Once you have the starting abilities, you input those in a GMAT planning tool. It's an AI-based utility that empowers each and every one of you to build your personalized study plan in about 5 minutes. What do? You actually put in your quant and verbal scores. It then recommends what should be your target quant and target verbal score. Again, this is something that's done individually for everyone. Someone who had a higher verbal score would probably see this number to be higher if it had a higher starting verbal score, and correspondingly this number would be lower. It then tells you how should you hit that Q50, what arithmetic and algebra percentile should you look at, and what SCCR and RC percentile should you look at. It then tells you how long do you need to go from your starting percentile to your ending percentile. This is the time per subsection that you see. The starting abilities, target abilities, and time per subsection. And then it tells you, based on how much time you can spend. This is the time that you put in. I know this looks a bit hazy over here, but in the app it looks really well. It tells you how much time you need to study on every day. And you can again edit this as well if you have, for example, a certain event to attend. You can really say, I can't study over here. The calendar just automatically. Again, if you want to do something like this, if you want to build a PSP, if you're an e-GMAT student, you already have links to this. But if you want to get that personalized study plan, you can click on this and get your personalized study plan as well. You can also do this from your free trial from the Get Study Plan section. Okay, and again, would love for some of you to be a part of this group. Okay. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I have upwards of 19,000 students studying at top business schools who connected with me. We also share, lots of things with regards to what goes on in the GMAT and MBA world. So yeah, you can just search for me on LinkedIn, and this is how I look. Okay, with that, let's get to the core of this webinar, which is pre-thinking. Okay, so here's how we're going to go about the session today. We're going to really talk about how do you approach pre-thinking today, or sorry, approach assumption questions today. We're going to discuss your current approach. Then we're going to build that foundation of pre-thinking. So we will spend time on 3 arguments to build that foundation of pre-thinking. Once we have that foundation, we will then apply pre-thinking on 2 really hard questions. I mean, these are, I think, the hardest official questions that I know of, at least. And the beautiful questions that test your ability to visualize, your ability to comprehend the argument in an amazing manner. And if you get those, you'd get a lot of questions right on the GMAT. And then from this point on, we'll look at and say, okay, now that you have a taste of pre-thinking, how should you strengthen that ability? How should you cement that skill? So we'll talk about what should you do next and where will you get more practice. Okay. Alabia says, is this different from what we have in the e-GMAT self-paced course? No, the method's no different. It's just that I'm teaching it here versus on the self-paced course. Of course, you have it at your own disposal. So it's the same pre-thinking method. It's not a new method. We've been teaching this method for over a decade and refining on this. Okay. So at a very high level, just to summarize, we'll document how you prepare today, and we'll build that skill of pre-thinking. And then we will really look at, okay, what should you do next to strengthen that skill that you've started to build over here. Okay, so let's talk about your current approach in CR, and let me get in that poll question. Okay. Before we talk about your current approach, I want to really define what pre-thinking is. So because the term pre-thinking has existed in the world of GMAT preparation for a very long time, it's often been misunderstood. Pre-thinking, and we were the first company to precisely define pre-thinking. So pre-thinking is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind in 15 seconds, and you do this before you start looking at answer choices. And so the key thing over here is that, in an argument, you can have multiple assumptions. We're not trying to figure out each and every assumption. Pre-thinking is a means to ensure that you understand the logic that the author uses. It's a litmus test for that. And that's why if you can come up with one potential assumption, you're good. A skilled pre-thinker is able to come up with that one potential assumption in about 15 seconds once you've read the argument. Now, today, tomorrow, and even day after tomorrow, this might take you a minute, and that's okay. You're learning that skill. But what's going to happen is, as you apply pre-thinking on more and more arguments, the time to pre-think will come down if you're doing it right, and you will observe it, every second or third argument or so. So and till about that 15th to 20th argument, when it will come down to 15 seconds on an average. You'll still see an argument that will stump you, but more or less on an average, it'll be about 15 seconds. The third thing is you've got to do it before you look at answer choices. Why? Because it has to be done just on the argument. Answer choices provide new information. We do not want that new information to corrupt your mind. So once you start reading answer choices, you can throw pre-thinking out of the window. Why? Because now your brain has that additional information, but it's going to mess you up. One of the biggest challenges that people have in learning how to pre-think is refraining from looking at the answer choices. That's one of the biggest restraint that you have to build. Okay. The reason why I want to talk about this is why, because a lot of people, especially those who are not believers in pre-thinking, even though it has delivered more 700 scores than any other method, they try and equate pre-thinking as predicting the answer. No, we are not trying to predict what's in the answer choices. We're just trying to ensure that we understand the logic that the author uses completely. Okay. So, which methodology do you use today to solve CR questions? And methodology one is you read the argument, you go to the answer choices, you evaluate the answer choices, and then you do a back and forth between the argument and the answer choices till you kind of reach what we call as that final candidate. The second method is you read the argument, you pre-think an assumption, and then evaluate the answer choices. You don't do as much back and forth. You probably do back and forth just once, only if you have to confirm something. So which method do you use? Is it method 1 or method 2? Today. Let's get a few more responses. I have about 60 responses. I have 132 students in the webinar. All right, 73. Let's get to 75 responses. 76. Good. Let me broadcast results. 57% of you do not use the pre-thinking approach. 43% of you do use the pre-thinking approach. For people who use the pre-thinking approach, I want to make sure you can become better pre-thinkers by the end of this webinar. For those of you who are over here, I want to encourage you, I want to motivate you enough so that you give pre-thinking a fair shot. Okay. Overall, let's kind of have some fun. Okay. Now, pre-thinking is a method, and that overall it's a fairly simple method. It's built on what the very definition of what an assumption is, or what a strengthener is, or what a weakener is, or what the objective of evaluating an argument is. So pre-thinking is used for every CR question type. I think the only whether it's strengthen, weaken, assumption, evaluate, logically, complete, or boldface. The only question type where we don't use pre-thinking as much is probably inference, although it helps there quite a bit as well. Now, but if you want to be a successful pre-thinker, there are certain skills that you need to have. And one of the most important skills or the most powerful skills that anyone can build on the GMAT is that ability to visualize. Okay, this is a skill that it's tested, evaluated in critical reasoning. And what visualizing means is imagining information. So let's kind of take an example. So let's say in a CR argument, the author makes a prediction that there's a seawall and it'll be able to sustain high waves that are coming from a hurricane. If that's the conclusion or the claim that the author is making, that at that point in time, I want your brain to imagine a seawall. I want a brain to imagine high waves coming through and hitting that seawall. And depending on what you have to do in that question, whether breaking through that seawall or not knocking that seawall over. And again, in the context of information that's given in the argument. But that ability to visualize is really important. If you don't have that ability to visualize, regardless of the method that you use, you're not going to do well in critical reasoning or reading comprehension. Okay. Another way of visualization is, let's say, if the author says that a majority of vaccinated people do not spread the coronavirus, then I want you to think about automatically a group of 100 people, divide them into two segments, one smaller and one larger, and then really say, okay, the smaller group is can spread the virus, and the larger group is not going to be able to spread the virus. So that's kind of what visualization means. Okay. The second piece is connecting statements. So once visualization applies to statements, and then when you connect those statements, you build what we call as a logic that the author uses, as a logical structure. That's the second piece that we'll focus on. And then once we understand these two things, then we'll formulate what we call as a falsification question to complete our pre-thinking. So with that, I want you to tell me what an assumption is. And we're going to do this using an example that's really close to your heart. So tell me what an assumption is, and let's kind of look at this one argument, and I want you to tell me what does the author assume over here. Read this argument and type in your answer as to what does the author assume in this argument. And once you press enter, I'll have your response. You won't see it on the screen, but I'll have it. And the moment I get about 20-25 responses, I'm going to broadcast results, so you would be able to see everyone's response then. Okay, here's the argument, very simple argument. Let's get 30 responses, and then I'm going to broadcast results. All right, guys, I have about 30 responses. Let me broadcast your responses here so everyone can see what others have said. Guys, I know some of you have joined late. The Q&A pod, which is the pod below the presentation, is for your questions to us. The pods on the right are for our questions to you. So please don't put your responses in the Q&A pod. It just buries other folks' questions there. Okay. All right. So you can really see most of you have given a really good answer. Folks have said admissions To Ivy Leagues, they require a GMAT score higher than 500. A score of 500 is not sufficient to get into any Ivy League school, and so on and so forth. So again, the reason why I have this simple argument is because this is an argument that doesn't require, for in your context, a lot of visualization. Why? Because you probably visualize this day in and day out. You think about Ivy League schools, you think about the GMAT score, so this visualization is automatic. And if you can visualize something, as getting to an assumption is a very natural thing. And so the real importance with regards to being able to answer C or N or C questions is building that skill to visualize. So let's see what does the author do over here. The author gives you a data point. It says, hey, Joe scored 500 on the GMAT. Based on this data point, he makes this prediction or a claim. He's talking about something in the future. He says, hey, Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. And this is what we call as a classical logical jump. And essentially, while making that claim, he is assuming that a score of 500 for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League schools. And you guys got pretty much all of it right, except the fact that you didn't focus on someone like Joe. And why is that important? Because the author's conclusion is about Joe. The author's conclusion is not about the Prince of Saudi Arabia. And actually, the Prince of Saudi Arabia does get into Harvard with that score of 500 or so. There's documented cases. But again, that's besides the point. The key point over here is if you can visualize something, assumptions are very, very a natural habit. We as humans are really good critical reasoners if we can absorb the information. The second thing is an assumption is very, very tightly linked to the conclusion, which is why he will and someone like Joe are very tightly linked. So with that, why don't you tell me what's the very definition of an assumption? Put your answers in here. Again, in the short answer pod on the right-hand side. What is an assumption? What's that formal definition? Okay, I have 2 answers, 10 answers. Again, please don't put your answers in the Q&A pods, Snigdha or Ravi. All right, we have quite a few answers here in the short answer pod. Okay. Unstated statement that needs to be true for the conclusion to hold true. That's excellent. The basis for the conclusion, which it depends upon, pretty okay. Unstated is hidden meaning, yes. Prerequisite required to make the argument right. I don't know. I won't use the word right, but I understand the sentiment that you have. Generalizing something, no, it's not that. Something that logically connects the statements in conclusion. Yes, an assumption logically connects, the argument and the statement and the conclusion, but everything that logically connects that is not an assumption. Okay. Sylvia has a great definition. It says new information that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Okay. So just in this webinar, I'm not going to ask you to write down a lot of things, but I'm going to ask you to write down 3 statements throughout this webinar. And I'm going to, of course, share this PDF with you. But this is one of the first statements. An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Okay. Really important. If you understand this definition, you'd be able to pretty much answer any question that the test will throw at you. Critical reasoning in many ways is like physics. If you understand the rules, you can do wonderful things with those rules by just purely applying them. Okay. So there are 2 traits of an assumption. One is it's an unstated idea, which means an assumption must provide new information or information that you can't infer from the argument, from the factual part of the argument, that is. And the second thing is it must satisfy this one condition called a must be true condition for the conclusion to be valid. Or in other words, as Sylvia said, without the assumption, the conclusion can break down. Okay. Now, when you evaluate answer choices, the correct answer choice will always satisfy both these conditions. The incorrect answer choices will typically play around this must be true aspect. Now, 90% of all official questions play around this must be true aspect, and about 10% play around that new information. In the 4 questions, full length questions that we'll solve in this webinar, along with a bunch of other fun questions that we'll solve. We'll solve one question in which there's an answer choice that does not provide new information. It satisfies this must be true condition, but it does not provide that new information, and hence is not the correct answer choice. Okay. Now at e-GMAT, we are really big on visualizing things. So I want you to visualize and understand that must be true condition through this house. So think of this house as an argument where the conclusion is this proof, and you have three supporting statements that are out here. And each one of these supporting statements is a candidate to be an assumption. Think of these three as your answer choices out there. So how do you visualize that must be true aspect of it? So let's say, let's call them 1, 2, and 3. And let's say we remove statement number 1. If you remove statement number 1 and the roof still stays upright, it doesn't cave in, then statement number 1 is not an assumption. Now the presence of that statement definitely made the roof stronger, but by removing that statement, the roof is still upright. So that's not an assumption. Okay. Now let's go forward and remove statement number 3 as well. If we remove 1 and remove 3, the roof still stays upright. Statement number 3 is not an assumption either. Okay. Now let's bring all of them back, and let's assume if we remove statement number 2 and the roof does cave in, if that happens, the conclusion breaks down. That's what the definition of an assumption is. It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Which means without that, the roof should cave in or the conclusion should break down. Does that visualization help a bit? Just simple visualization. Okay. Keep this in mind as we solve difficult questions, and you'd see some answer choices that you'd be confused, and I'm going to bring this back again and again. Okay. So this is what the essential pillar means. Each one of these are good strengtheners. An assumption is also a strengthener, but not every strengthener is an assumption. Okay. Only the essential strengthener is an assumption. Okay. So what does that must be true mean? It means that if the information that provided by assumption is not true, then there's a possibility, there are scenarios in which you can break the conclusion down, or which kind of comes from that very definition that the assumption must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Okay. So let's kind of use this, because this is, as I said, critical reasoning is like physics. If you understand the fundamentals of it, you can use it, apply them to get to the correct answer. Okay. So we're going to use the same argument that we were using, and we're going to look at this and say, okay, how do we apply this understanding to evaluate statements and figure out which one's correct and which one's not? So what does falsifying the conclusion mean? Falsifying the conclusion means that Joe, in the context of this argument, that Joe gets admission despite not scoring higher than 500, or Joe gets admission with a score of 500. Everyone's clear? If this happens, then my conclusion breaks down. Right? This happens, the author is no longer credible. He can no longer make that claim that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. Okay. So how do you use this to figure out if the answer choice is correct or not? Now we said this is our correct assumption. It just felt very intuitive. So the question that we ask is, does it satisfy that must be true condition? Which means if this answer choice is, if this statement is not true, will Joe get admission to Ivy League colleges? Now, this is important, so I'm going to slow down a bit. When you say a statement is not necessarily true, by definition, and let me repeat again, by definition, what you are also saying is that its negated version automatically becomes true, or its negated instance automatically becomes true, which means the score of 500 for someone like Joe is acceptable to Ivy League colleges. This aspect becomes a possibility. Now, when this aspect becomes a possibility, does my conclusion break down? Absolutely, it does break down. Why? Because if this becomes a possibility, then the author cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. Now, some of you may be saying, how can you say that if I say a statement isn't true, its negated instance becomes true? So let's take a few examples over here. Okay. When I say Harvard has the best MBA program, And if you say that's not true, then are you not saying that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or that an MBA program that's better than Harvard or just as good as Harvard exists? Are you not automatically saying that if you're saying this is not true? Right? So when you say this is not true, then what you're automatically saying is the negated version is true, because otherwise you have no grounds to say that this is not true if you don't have that knowledge of that negated version. Okay. Similarly, let's take another simple statement. John runs faster than David. If you say that's not true, by definition, you're also saying, that's just an inference out of it, that either David is faster or David is just as fast as John, right? So again, when you say a statement is not true, by definition, you're saying its negated version is true. So in the same way, when you say an assumption, this statement is not necessarily an assumption, which means you're saying this is not must be true. By definition, you're also saying its negated version is a possibility that exists. Okay. Anushka says, will you explain the negation again? I'm not trying to explain how to negate a statement. I'll give you an article, and on the course there's a pretty detailed module on how to negate. I'm just explaining how to apply negation. Again, those are two very different things, but we'd be happy to share an article. It's something that I co-authored. It's probably the most comprehensive work on negation. Okay, so again, this is the aspect of must be true. All right. If an answer choice is the correct assumption, then the conclusion will break down in the presence of its negated version. That's applying the negation test. And it comes from the fact that, hey, if you have a correct assumption, it must be true for the conclusion to be valid. It also cuts the other way. If you're looking at an incorrect answer choice, then your conclusion will not break down in the presence of negated instance of that answer choice. Let's kind of look at this over here. Okay. Let's say Faith has a great question. It says, does it mean when it appears in answer choices, it means it's not new information? No, Faith. If it's there in the answer choices, then it's not in the argument. Or if you, let me just rephrase it. If it's in the answer choices, and if it provides information that you can't infer from the argument, then it is new information, right? And we're going to see that in questions, or in the past one. This information, this is an answer choice, and this is new information. The argument over here does not tell you whether the score of 500 on the GMAT, whether it's a good score or a bad score. This statement is providing new information to you. Okay. So new information or not, is that judgment is built purely on the argument. If the answer choice provides information that's already there in the argument, then it doesn't provide new information. And you're going to see an example of it over here. Or in other words, if an answer choice said Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, or Joe took the GMAT on this date and scored 500, then in the context of this argument, it probably wouldn't have provided it would not provide significant new information. Okay, good question. One other thing, I see a lot of you asking me questions in the Q&A pod. No one calls me sir, or any one of us sir, so just call us by our name. When you call us sir, we start to feel old. Then our energy levels go down, and you don't want my energy levels going down. Could we have your video? You could, but then the audio would suffer for a few of you. So if you want to see my video, go to our YouTube channel. You'd see my video over there. We love Adobe Connect because I think from a polling standpoint, from an interactivity standpoint, from how real time the audio is, this is wonderful, way better than any other platform, which is the reason why we use it. When it comes to video, when it comes real time video is still not as great as you would think. So yeah, towards the end, I'd be happy to start my video. All right, let's kind of evaluate this answer choice and say, is this a correct answer? A score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. And let's ask ourselves, is this must be true? Or in other words, will Joe get admission if this statement is no longer true? So when we say if this statement is no longer true, then its negated version becomes true. So which means a score of 500 on the GMAT becomes a good score. So if that happens, does it mean that Joe gets admission? No, the answer is no. Joe won't get admission. Why? Because when you think about the original logic of the argument, this is not predicated on the fact as to whether you call this score of 500 or a good or a bad score. You could replace 500 with 700 or even 750. The logic of the argument will still not change. Okay. So that's the value of it in this case. So I'm going to not go through this. I'm going to give this as a foundation, and let's kind of solve some real questions now that we understand what an assumption is. We still haven't figured out what pre-thinking is. We're going to do that next, but we probably have a better idea of what an assumption is. Okay. So again, I want to repeat the skills that we would focus on as a skill to visualize, the skill to understand the logic that the author uses, and the skill to formulate the falsification question. And this is the area that we're going to focus next on. Now, how would we do that? Just to summarize, for the correct answer choice, the conclusion will not hold true if you negate it. For the incorrect answer choice, the conclusion will still stay strong as you negate that answer choice. Okay. So we're going to do a pre-thinking exercise, and our objective is to learn how to pre-think. All right. So the process that we'll follow is I'm going to give you an argument, no answer choices, because once I give you answer choices, then you think in the context of those answer choices. I want your thinking to go more broad. Okay. You're going to record your pre-thinking in a short answer poll. Then I'm going to go about teaching you how I go about pre-thinking, what is that falsification question, and then we'll probably evaluate a few submissions if time permits. Okay. So with that, do you have a pen and paper? Do you have a pen and paper ready? I'm going to give you another 10 seconds. Good. Because pre-thinking is best done slow, especially when you're learning it. All right. So I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes. Read the argument really slowly. And I'm going to show the argument in about 10 seconds. And then tell me what does the author pre-think over here. You clear all answers. Remove broadcast results so you don't see each other's answers. And here is the argument, and I'm going to mute myself. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, get those answers in. Last 30 seconds. Type those answers, press enter. And for if you don't remember the question, it's what does the author assume here? What's the assumption here? All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me broadcast the results so you guys can see that. So you can really see a lot of interesting answers. Some of you are saying research doesn't contribute to student learning as much as teaching. Reward system for tenure enhances student learning. Tenured professors do more research than teaching. Some of you have talked about the reward system. That's good. So take about 15 to 20 seconds to look at the wonderful answers that you guys have provided. Again, really good participation, guys. Thank you very much for enthusiastically participating over here. Okay, research higher skill level amongst the tenured professors, different motivation factors. Let's kind of look at this here. Okay, I'm going to actually clear some of the questions so that the Q&A part is clean. All right. So the first thing that I would want you to do when you think about all of this is to isolate the conclusion and visualize it. And that's really important. The second thing is understand how the author arrives at that conclusion. So what's the logic that the author uses? What facts has the author provided to back his conclusion up? Is there a certain context that's in there? Is there information that may make you believe less in the conclusion? Look at that. And then we're going to talk about a very specific pre-thinking question. And as we do this, assumptions would jump right at you. Okay. So let's talk about this pre-thinking method or the falsification question. All right. And this stems right from the very definition of an assumption. What is an assumption? It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So in other words, this means that without an assumption, a conclusion can break down, right? That's a very definition of an assumption. Is that correct? Without the assumption, there's a possibility that conclusion can break down. So this means that an assumption is built around scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. Let's go back to that house visualization. If you were someone who was building pillars and you had to figure out where to position those pillars, the question that you would ask is, where is the roof caving in? That's the first place you're going to put those pillars, right? The assumption works the same way. It's built around those scenarios where that conclusion breaks down. Does that make sense? Building a house on the roof, figure out where the roof's caving in, put pillars over there. That's your assumption, right? So if you have to find assumption, ask this question. In which scenario, given the information in the argument, does my conclusion break down? If you find those scenarios, all assumptions are saying, hey, such scenarios are no longer possible. Okay. So that falsification question, this is the second thing that I'll ask you to write down. That is, under what circumstances, given the information in the argument, will my conclusion break down? Write this down. The first was the definition of an assumption. The second is this. Now, there's one other thing that I'll ask you to write if That's about it. If you remember these things, you'll be able to answer every question. Okay. So let's now look at this question over here. And what I've done is I've divided this question into 3 different statements. I want you to tell me which statement is the main conclusion. Okay. And in my poll over here, I have 4 statements. I only want you to focus on statement number 1, 2, and 3. Please don't respond to choose statement 4 because that doesn't exist here. So which statement over here is the main conclusion? Let's get a few more responses. I have 120 students. Let's get at least a 40 odd responses here, or 50 odd responses. Which statement is the main conclusion? 5, 45 responses, 47 responses. Great, upwards of 50 responses. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. Isn't polling fun? Let me ask you this. How many of you would rather that I don't ask you questions and just teach, or how many of you love polling and getting your inputs? What would you rather do? Polling is fun, right? Yeah. I love when you guys participate. So okay. You can see how the group has done, and you can also see how you've done in this case. But 57% of you chose statement 2, which is this over here, which is the right answer. But look at 26% of you who've chosen statement 1 and 17% who've chosen statement 3. And the beauty about this is when you poll, when you ask such questions, you get insights and you're able to give feedback. Even though we have upwards of 100 students here, we can give feedback to each one of you, and you get that feedback personally. And when you get that, you know where you need to improve. Remember this, it doesn't matter where you are now. What matters is what you do with that information, what you do with that feedback, and how you improve. This is what when I went to business school, one of the most important things I remembered, which was the dean of my business school told me, he said, Rajat, when you go to business school, it's a very low risk environment. The reason you are here is A, to learn, but B, you are here to make mistakes. Why? Because when you go out in the business world, I don't want you to make mistakes. So I want you to make fewer mistakes. So use that, use this environment to try and your ideas out. Use your classmates to bounce off ideas so that you make more mistakes here. The more you participate, the more mistakes you make, the more you learn. Okay, that's essentially what this webinar is about as well. This is where the more you participate, the more personalized feedback you get, and the more you can do something about it. Okay. All right. So let's come back to this over here. So statement 2 is the correct answer. And when you think about what's the main conclusion, ask yourself, what does the author want you to believe from this one passage or this one argument that I saw? And remember this, the conclusion is always by the author of the argument, not by someone else, but by the author of the argument. So let's kind of look at statement 1 and see why is it that statement 1 is not the conclusion. Okay, a lot of people think that has this word concludes, and this is what makes statement 1 the conclusion. But when you think about who's making that conclusion here, it's that published paper. It's not the author of the argument, it's that published paper. And also read the content of it. Statement 1 says a recently published paper concludes what? That tenured professors or those on their way to tenure enhance student learning less than full-time lecturers. So it provides a data point, it provides a fact over there. Statement 2, on the other hand, is what the author wants you to believe. It starts with a keyword, which is clearly, it's a conclusion marker. It says the difference between professors and the tenure system and the full-time lecturer has to do with the reward system. This is what the author wants you to believe. This is what he wants to bring forward. This is the takeaway from this argument. And statement number 3 over here is written to make statement 2 more believable. So statement 3 is what we call as a premise, or if this were not in the argument, you would call this a strengthener. Okay. So for those of you who chose statement 1 or statement 3, are you guys clear as to why statement 2 is the main conclusion? Is it true? Is it right to say that the conclusion is an author's opinion and not a fact? Absolutely. That's a good way to look at it. A conclusion can never be a fact. It is always questionable. You always doubt it. Okay. Whenever you make a conclusion, people will always doubt it. They'll try and weaken it. And a person who makes a good argument thinks about those weaknesses in advance. Because 2 is because of 3. 3 is to support 2. So if you're going towards the ABC test, you would really just say that 3 is written to make 2 more believable. over here. So that's why. Okay. So if the text says something about a published paper, it's usually always a fact. Not necessarily. I don't remember this. Very few formulaic things. I don't want to give you a formulaic or something that you can just remember and apply it. This is the GMAT's not a consume and just puke kind of test. You can't do facts. Why? Because there is a possibility that the author may make a conclusion or may make a claim about the published paper. If the author had said clearly the facts in the paper are wrong, blah blah blah, then the author could say something about the published paper, and that would be the main conclusion. Okay. So again, it's about what does the author want you to believe from this argument. It's always about that author. Is the word clearly always an indication of a conclusion? There's a set of conclusion markers that are there, but again, don't just go by the formulaic approach. Those markers are there to assist you. They are not a replacement of your ability to visualize that argument. Please don't do that. Especially if you want to get to a 90th percentile in critical reasoning. If you want to get to a 50th percentile, yes, but not the 90th percentile. Okay. You can have that set of markers. We have those markers in the premise and conclusion files, but again, they do not replace that ability to visualize. Okay. Could a fact be a premise or just background info? It could be both. It could be both. What will happen when there's both an intermediate conclusion and a main conclusion? Then the intermediate conclusion is the intermediate conclusion, and the main conclusion is the main point that the author wants you to believe in. In fact, boldface questions are just like that. Again, we are going beyond the scope of it, but I'd love to answer this question towards the end of the webinar. Otherwise, we'll digress from the main idea. Is that okay? Is that okay, guys? Good. Okay, so let's look at the argument structure, or actually let's first look at the conclusion. All right, so and let's visualize this conclusion over here. Okay, so the conclusion says the difference between the professors in the tenured system and the full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. And essentially, when you're really doing this, you say, okay, this one has a reward system over here, and you say for tenured professors, and what you're really saying is 40% of the rewards built around teaching or teaching outcomes, and for full-time lecturers, 70% of the reward is built around teaching outcomes. Okay, so that's something that you could visualize over here. But it's really what you have to do is when you read the claim, you say you have to compare two entities, you have to compare the reward systems over here, and you say tenured professors, less of a reward around teaching, because I know the context is about improving student outcomes, and full-time lecturers, a greater proportion of the reward towards teaching. Now, that's something that's really there. The other piece you have to understand is the author is not disputing what's written in statement 1. He's just stating a reason for it, and he's saying, hey, the reason is that reward system. That's really important. Okay, so this is what the author is trying to assert. That is why this is the main conclusion over here. This is what he wants you to believe. Statement number 1 provides context or the situation that the author is trying to explain. Okay, now because this statement 1, the conclusion is built around statement 1, so you could say statement 1 in some ways supports the conclusion. Similarly, statement 3 also supports the main conclusion. Why? Because with statement 3, you can really say that my conclusion becomes more believable. Without statement 3, my belief in the conclusion reduces. Okay, let me look at one other poll question. Where is my poll question? So statement 3, I want you to tell me whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Is it just tenured faculty, just lecturers, both of them, or neither? Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Again, I want 50 responses here. I have 16, 19, 20, 25, I have 40, 43, upwards of 50. Great. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results. 78% of you got it right. It's just tenured faculty. And 16% you can really see got it wrong. Again, these are little things that make you go wrong. A lot of people, you look at this word greater and really say, we are comparing tenured faculty and full-time lecturers. No, this greater is not comparing tenured faculty and full-time lecturers. This greater is comparing just for tenured faculty, the emphasis on research versus the emphasis on teaching. So again, maybe there's 70% emphasis on research and 30% emphasis on teaching for tenured faculty. We, by the way, don't know anything about the reward system for full-time lecturers. Is that clear for all the people who did not choose just tenured faculty? Is that clear that this greater is not talking about lecturers at all? We have no information about lecturers here. Okay. So with all of this, and you have to have, even before you get towards that pre-thinking question, you have to have this level of clarity. Okay. Now, once you have this level of clarity, let's now look at the generic pre-thinking question and translate that, the skill of translation, really important, into the context of this argument. So a pre-thinking question was, under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will my conclusion break down? Okay. So what's my conclusion breakdown condition? That the reward system is not responsible. So this is 1. Let's call this 1 over here. And this is 1 over here as well. This is the translation of 1. Under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance? Can you see how conclusion breakdown translates to this over here? Can you see that? Can you see that translation? Yes, no? Okay. And what about given the facts in the argument? That's 2. What are the facts in the argument? That, hey, we know full-time lecturers enhance student performance more than professors do. And we know that reward system for professors or tenured professors places a greater emphasis on research. Both these facts still need to be taken into account. Okay. So that's the question that you had, that you asked. In what circumstances or under what circumstances will you not blame the reward system? The difference still exists, but you're not going to blame the reward system for the difference in performance, given that we know that reward system for tenured faculty places greater emphasis on research. What are some circumstances? If the non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system, then you can't blame the reward system, right? If non-tenured have just the same reward system, then it can't be the reward system that's blamed, that you would blame. Is that correct? Yes, no? Right? If non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system, then it has to be something else. The other piece is, yes, you can build a reward system, but what if most tenured faculty, they don't act as per the reward system. They don't care as per the reward system of the reward system. Isn't it falsifying the data point? Which data point? That's a great question, but which data point is it falsifying? Do we know anything about the reward system for non-tenured faculty? Do we know? No, we don't have any idea. Good. Great question, as I say. And these are the things, as I said, this is a low risk environment. Ask those questions. A second piece, what if you build a reward system, but people don't act as per it? So if there's data that says, hey, most tenured professors don't care about the reward system, that's not how they decide whether to focus on teaching versus research. Okay. So if these are areas or scenarios in which my roof caves in, my conclusion breaks down, then what are my assumptions? These things are not possible. Non-tenured professors do not have an identical reward system, and most tenured faculty, they does care about the reward system. Okay. These are 2 assumptions. Can you really see how we went about this in a very systematic fashion? And as we went about this in a systematic fashion, we were able to come up with assumptions fairly easily. Can you see how we went from one step to the other? We first understood what the conclusion was, then we built that logical structure, then we asked that falsification question, and assumptions jumped right at us. Right? We're going to use the same approach regardless of whether it's a causal argument or a predictive argument, regardless of the context, kind of the structure of the question, our approach to solving questions is not going to change. Okay. So how many of you are concerned about timing? How many of you are worried? Man, this is a lot more involved than what I thought I'd be doing. Who isn't? Okay. All right. So let me first say this. We wouldn't have these results or these results if these methods didn't work. All right. Facts. Okay. So these methods do work. The second thing that I want to talk about is whenever you learn a new skill, initially, you will always take longer. Okay. So your timing will go up right away as you start applying this approach. But as you master it, as humans, our ability to do things once our neural pathways are wired is tremendous. Think about driving and think about the time when you learn driving. Initially, you had to worry about each and everything, whether your feet are right, whether you see a stop sign or not, looking around and so on and so forth. But right now, a lot of that has become second nature to you. In the same way, the ability to visualize, the ability to formulate that falsification question, the ability to build that logical structure is going to become that second nature if you consciously work on it. So this is how your journey will be if you truly want to get to that 730 or higher score, and if you truly want to build that skill of pre-thinking. Okay. So let's say I have two axes over here. One is the accuracy. So the higher you go on y-axis, the more accurate you become, and you see the difficulty level of questions put in over here. And then here's a time to answer questions. Let's say you start at point number 1, which is your accuracy is low, the time to answer questions is kind of at that medium level or so. The first thing that's going to happen as you try doing pre-thinking is your time to answer questions will go up as well as your accuracy will go up. Now, most people, when the time to answer questions goes up, they focus more on that. They don't focus on that improved accuracy. And you're going to be like this guy over here. You say, why the hell am I doing this? I already worry about timing. Okay. And some of you will give up. There is a dropout over here. Why? Because there are people who promise you shortcuts and tricks and they are attractive to you. Okay. We don't. We would never give you a trick because we know it doesn't work on the GMAT. It hasn't led to success. But there will be those who believe in us and who would continue doing this. And as you do this, your ability to visualize will go up. As you see those argument structures, you'd be able to really translate them into scenarios right away. The ability to formulate that falsification question would go up. So as that happens, the accuracy will continue to go up, but the time to answer questions beyond a point will start going down. Okay, and within 20 questions, this from here to here is 20 arguments, you'd really get to a point where your time to answer questions is a lot less than what you started with, and your accuracy or your ability is a lot higher. And at that point, you would be in a phase where you would answer each and every question using pre-thinking. This is what I call as, how many of you over here are engineers? Okay, this is what I call as the pre-thinking hysteresis. For those of you who are engineers, remember hysteresis. Okay, so once you get to this point, you will have a bias towards pre-thinking. You would solve every question using pre-thinking, and you'd continue to get better. Okay, and forgive me for those of you who are non-physics or non-engineering graduates. Okay. Right. So a lot of my examples I try to make them generic, but I'm an engineer at heart. So some of those would be fairly engineering specific. But again, you don't lose out on a whole lot. So here are some examples. One of our students scored a 740. He says, understand the passage completely. Again, this is about reading comprehension. Pre-thinking, really important in RC as well. Equally important, pre-think an answer before you look at the answer choice. Probably this one word will have the most impact on your on your GMAT score. Jim Mew, who's a current GSB student, he says, answer CR questions as if there are no answer choices. Pre-thinking is a game changer. When it gets to those 700 level questions, you have to do pre-thinking. Why? Because it to help you focus on the logic that the author uses and not deviate from the key argument when you see those tempting answer choices. And you'll see a lot of tempting answer choices. This guy went from 35th percentile, so he's got a V34, really good RC, but really bad CR, 37th percentile in CR, to a 97th percentile in 20 days. All he did was he did pre-thinking. That's it. He focused on pre-thinking, 20 days, 97th percentile. That's what allowed him to get to a 770. Okay. Harshit, again, one of our students who improved from a 520 to a 740, that 220-point improvement. Again, he says, pre-thinking primes the mind and we're constantly on our toes while reading an argument or a paragraph. Okay. Again, pre-thinking helps you become a much better reader. You don't need to be a voracious reader to ace GMAT RC. Okay, and you're going to see an example of the focus that pre-thinking provides you in this particular question. This is an argument which looks very, very simple, but the answer choices have a potential to mess you up. All right, so here's the question, and excuse me. You should see the poll. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. Select the correct answer. Good luck, guys. All right, we have the 30-second timer. Let's get that in. 30 seconds, guys. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's end the poll. And I want to thank you for that wonderful participation and broadcast the results. You can see how you guys polled. You can see how everyone else polled as well. Choices, excuse me, B and E, really popular, as are choices C and D. And as I said, this is an argument where the answer choices will mess you up. This is an argument where 4 out of 5 answer choices are strengtheners. One of those 4 strengtheners is the correct assumption. The other 3 are not. Okay, let me hide this. So tell me, how do you feel after solving this argument, or while looking at the answer choices, how did you feel? Uncertain, okay. Feels great, good. Confused, good. You can see the different kind of emotions that are there. Confused, confident. Pre-thinking helps. The answer choices are confusing. They're designed to be. And that's where, when you look at this, this is a 700 level question, the accuracy is 35% here. And that's the very definition of it. Very simple argument, but that's where the answer choices mess you up. Okay. So let's kind of look at this. What's going on? We want to finance road repairs, and to finance road repairs, we are looking at a 50% increase in the toll, and the toll currently is 10 cents per mile. Okay, there's this guy called Highway Commissioner. He says the toll increase, if we increase that toll by 50% from 10 cents per mile, it'll increase the annual revenue generated by the toll highway by at least 50% per year. Okay, that's what he's saying. And if you look back at the argument, he says, what's the assumption that the commissioner is making? What's the assumption on which the claim depends? Okay, so let's kind of look at this over here. And this is the claim that annual revenue generated by the toll highway will increase by 50%. And when you look at this, the way I want you to look at this is, if last year the annual revenue was 10 million, right now this would go to at least 15 million, or let's say you put the word 16 million over here. That's kind of what I want you to visualize in your mind. And why would it go up? Because last year we were targeting 10 cents per mile. Now we're going to put at 15 cents per mile or so. Okay. So my question to you, how do we estimate annual revenue in the context of this argument? It's toll per mile multiplied by the total number of toll miles, right? In the context of this argument, the annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by the average number of toll miles. And again, remember this, number of people. Do you see number of people in this equation? Do you see number of people in this equation? No. All of that is built in. If you're putting number of people, if you're putting all of that information in this equation explicitly, then your response is biased by the information in the answer choices. And that's why you do not want to look at answer choices, because they provide information that corrupts your brain. Okay, you don't want your brain to be corrupted. Okay. Simply, if you read the argument, your annual revenue is how much toll am I collecting per mile and how many total miles are being traveled on the toll. Okay, so we asked the same pre-thinking question. This is the same pre-thinking question. Under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? What's my conclusion breakdown? The annual revenue not increasing by 50%. Okay, so again, I ask ourselves, under what circumstances would the annual revenue not increase by 50%, provided that toll per mile has gone up by 50%. So in other words, if we already know this number has gone up by 50%, in what scenario will this number not go up by 50%? In what scenario will this number? If the distance traveled decreases, if total number of toll miles go down, right? Or it doesn't increase at all. Is that clear to everyone? So my only assumption, my only falsifying scenario is the total number of miles decreases. The assumption really is the total number of miles driven does not decrease. Is that clear? Very simple, right? We've not looked at the answer choices. So this is very, very simple here. Okay. Now, answer choice B, which was the most popular incorrect answer choice. And we're going to look at every answer choice and I will share how you guys polled. You can see how you guys polled over here. Okay, you can see which answer choice did you choose. Choice B talks about the total number of trips made on the toll highway will not decrease from its prior level. Okay. Now, if the total number of trips, if that number decreases, does that mean that the total miles will go down? Okay. Does it definitely mean that the total number of miles driven on the toll highway will go down? Not necessarily. Why? Because let's say last year we had 1,000 trips. Now this year we get to 900 trips. Okay. Then does it mean that we'll travel fewer miles? No, not really. Why? Because if each of these 900 trips have more miles or the average number of miles per trip goes up, then you can still have more miles driven. Okay. So is this a must be true? Is this a must be true? Does it satisfy the must be true condition? No. People who chose choice B, is that clear why choice B is not the correct answer? Right? Must be true means it has to be true. Without it, the conclusion will break down. It just, that's why I said, remember that definition of what an assumption is. Okay. Let's look at choice E, which is our correct answer. Choice E talks about the total distance. The total distance travel goes down, okay, then our revenue will go down, right? So which is why this is your must be true. Let's look at choice C, because people did choose choice C. If the average length of the trip decreases, what can compensate for that? Why is this not a must be true? The number of trips, not number of people, but trips, number of trips. Choices B and C in many ways are complementary, right? If the number of trips go down, or number of trip goes down, then the length of trip can compensate. If the length of trip goes down, then the number can compensate. Choice D, again, great strengthener, but not an assumption. The number of drivers who constantly avoid toll highways and use secondary roads will not increase from its current level. Let's say that increases, then the existing set of drivers could take more trips, right? Or even if they don't take more trips, they could drive longer. Okay, which is why choice D is not a must be true. Now, what did you learn from this question? What are your takeaways from this? Pay more attention. Okay. Use pre-thinking. Don't get corrupted. Simple, clear formulas. Not formulas, logical linkages is what I would call it. I mean, it was a formula here, but in general, it's logical linkage. Sometimes that logical linkage leads to formulas. Okay. I wouldn't say pre-think an equation. I would say pre-think or understand the logic. And yes, the conclusions are really important. Okay. Now, DK had a question which said, can there be a case where it's a must be true statement, but it doesn't provide new information? Yes, in DK, we're going to see that with an example. Okay, that's good. Each question has certain takeaways over here. Now, questions 4 and 5 are very difficult questions. Let me just say this, okay? My objective with these questions is to really teach you new things. These are questions which, if you get wrong, don't kill yourself, because they're designed to mess you up. As I said, two of the most challenging questions that I've seen. If you get them right for the right reasons, give yourself a pat on the back. But if you get them wrong, don't kill yourself. Take the learnings from these questions. Okay. And I'm going to give you quite a bit of time. So the way we do questions 4 and 5, and this is the same way we'll do stuff in the geometry session tomorrow, is I want you to click on not answered. So I want 30 to 40 of you to select not answered. That way, I won't time you guys as a group. When you choose an answer choice other than not answered, I'm going to call time. And let me put in my notes part so that you know what percentage of the class has answered. Yes, here's my timer. And at the bottom, I need 8 more people to say not answered. My timer over here. Let me prop my computer up so I have the keyboard to work with. So my timer over here will say 0% done, for example, 48, 49. Good. Let me remove broadcast results. So 2 questions back to back, then we'll discuss both these questions. I'm going to mute myself. Good luck, guys. Okay, guys, another 20 seconds. 70% of you are done. So let's get those answers in. Five, four, three, two, excuse me, and one. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. This is how you guys polled. And I'm going to give you the next question. Now, this is a difficult question. The next question is easier than this. This is a question that I call as the perfect storm. Difficult context, difficult answer choices, logical structure not as simple. Next one's simpler than this. So, um, so yeah, you're going to have more fun with the next one. Let's just get in the poll and again, you know the drill. I want you guys to select not answered first before I show the question so that I can time you guys. 38. Let's get 40 people to say not answered. Good. I'm gonna. Oh, I had broadcast results earlier. Okay. So here is the question. Good luck, guys. I'm gonna mute myself. All right, guys. 70% of the class is done. 30-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. going to broadcast the results. Again, thank you for that amazing participation. You can see how people poll. Choice D was very popular. Choice C was very popular as well, and as is choice E. This is a wonderful question. So we'll discuss both these questions. But before I get there, I want to talk to people who are in that not answered bucket. If you're confused, still put in an answer. That way you would get to know where you're making a mistake. Otherwise, it's just you don't get feedback. And I don't like that feeling of not getting feedback. Okay. But having said that, how did you feel about these questions? And we're going to discuss every option, every question, every sentence in these two arguments. So don't worry about your doubts, but how did you feel? Yes, they were harder, definitely harder. Yes, absolutely. Q5 was okay, Q4 was super tough, absolutely. Okay. So these are questions where the reason why I have them is because these are a refinement of that approach towards pre-thinking. I want to, because a lot of you um, would struggle to apply pre-thinking on this, not because pre-thinking doesn't work. Pre-thinking works beautifully, and as you work with me, you'd be able to come up with assumptions on your own. It's just that visualization aspect, understanding that statements aspect, that's kind of where you would falter. And once we correct that, and you would see that once you have a really good understanding of the argument itself, you would be able to pre-think here. All right. Um, so that's something which is there. And if you're questioning your comprehension skills, don't worry. These are two of the most challenging arguments, as I said. So don't judge yourself based on these two arguments. Again, let me tell you up front, this is a place to learn. All right. This is a place to improve on. You are at that point where you have to improve from. Okay. So don't judge yourself. Don't kick yourself. If you got them right for the right reasons, definitely congratulate yourself. Okay. One of the other things that I want to actually talk about here is that when you are in a group, which is as big and as diverse as this one over here, we try and compare ourselves to others. How many of you do that? How many of you really say, okay, this guy got it right, this I did not, and so on and so forth? And it's a very natural tendency to do it, but it can be very counterproductive. Let me just say this, and I personally experienced it, and that's what I'm really saying. Um, so about 15 years ago, I used to play competitive sports. I used to play cricket. I used to play badminton, and so there is that sense of competition that was built in me. Now, about 3 months back, I started playing squash, um, and and uh, and that same sense of competition was there, where I would beat someone or I would lose to someone, and I would really just whenever I was just constantly comparing myself to others who were playing with me in that ring. There are two problems with that. One is when you compare yourselves to others, you are limited just to the audience in that ring. Now here that part's not as big because you have 100 people who are serious, so you have a fairly representative sample here, whereas when I played squash I was playing with 4 people, so that's not as representative. But that's one piece. But the other thing is, if you're comparing yourself to others, you're not comparing yourself to you in the on the prior question, or for me in the prior shot. You're not focusing on your improvement, you're focusing on what the other person did right, and you're trying to do that right. And when you do that, you don't improve as quickly. On the other hand, if you focused on yourself and said, I'm not going to make that mistake, if you identify mistakes on the prior question and try and reduce that, you're going to find improvement happens a lot faster. So that's something that I want you to do. So compare yourself to what you did in on the prior question, the question before that, not to someone else. At least not now. When you get into that test readiness stage, that's the time when you want to compare yourself to others, but not right now. Does that make sense? Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. And I did that myself. For 3 months, I compared myself to others. I did improve to a certain degree, but not a whole lot. A week back, I started taking coaching for squash, and in 2 sessions I improved tremendously because the coach focused on individual shots for 10 minutes, And I was like, man, this is so much better. So try doing that, and that's kind of what I've learned myself. And again, it's ingrained in us, but sometimes we don't recognize that. So don't compare yourself to others. Compare yourself to your prior self, yesterday, day before yesterday, and be better than that. Okay. With that, let's kind of look at this and try and solve this question here. So conclusion, really simple to identify. I'm not going to focus on how did you identify the conclusion. The last statement is the conclusion, and the conclusion says the number of Erlanders receiving special program information did not increase significantly. Again, there are certain aspects about the conclusion that I want you to remember. One is this conclusion focuses just on people from wordland. Let's call them V's. Okay. The second thing is we're only concerned about special program information, and the third thing is we're concerned about what happened between these 2 years, not in 94 and not in 96. Okay. So if you were to visualize this, you say, let's say 1 million Verlanders received special program information in 94, then in 96, that number is more or less around that 1 million. It can go up by 10,000, it can probably go down by 10,000, but it's not going to go up by 100,000 or go down by 100,000 or so. That's what the conclusion is saying, and it's only talking about special program information. Is that clear with regards to the conclusion? Okay, again, visualizing really, really important here. Okay, let's kind of look at how did the author arrive at this. Okay, this is the main conclusion. Now, why does the author make that claim? The author makes that claim because there are two things that happened between 94 and 96. One is the number of receiving radios, which is these are the radios that people at home, people have them to listen to programs, that remain the same. Okay, but the number of transmitting stations more than doubled, so that went upwards of 2x. Okay, so if you think about this, this makes the conclusion more believable. So it's a supporting statement, and you can really see there's a word however between statement 3 and statement 2, which means that this statement goes against the main conclusion. Why? And logically also, it seems to go against the main conclusion. Why? Because if you have more transmitting stations, you would assume that more people will receive it, but that's not the case. Okay. Statement 1 gives us the context. Okay, this is not context. This should be a counter premise actually. Statement 1 gives us context. It says that, hey, if you need to receive RDS programming, you need to have a transmitting station and you need to have a receiving radio, both of which should have that technology. It has to be a mated system. Okay. Everything clear? Is that clear? Just the logical structure. The context says to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radio, or which means the transmitting and the tower. Both of them need to have RDS technologies. Between 94 and 96, the number of radios that people had remained unchanged. The number of stations increased a lot. So based on this, the author is saying, hey, the number of Erlanders who receive special program information more or less remain the same. Okay. So we're going to go through our falsification question again, and we're going to ask ourselves, and you're going to give me answers to this. Under what conditions will there be a significant addition, which means we are falsifying, we're breaking that conclusion down to the number of people receiving RDS programming, to the number of Verlanders. There should be Verlanders receiving RDS programming, considering the fact that we don't have a whole lot of additional radios, but we have a whole lot of additional stations. So tell me, in what scenario will I break this conclusion down? Will I have a lot more Verlanders or V's receiving special program information? Tell me some scenarios. More people listening to a single radio. Absolutely correct. More users per radios. What else? RDS stations can reach out to more existing RDS radios. So you add more stations, you increase the coverage, then you reach out to people who were not covered earlier. Okay. All right. Those are this. When the frequency of those programming increases. Again, frequency not as important. Why? Because remember, even if it's not talking about people are spending more time listening to RDS programs, what I was saying is more people are getting it. So even if you had one program and again, that frequency piece is very similar to number of trips versus number of cars. Okay. So people per radio and coverage, really important. Sylvia says, how do you choose? Great question. Let me get to a question actually. So you have two possible scenarios there. One is if additional stations now cover areas where there was no coverage earlier, but people had the right kind of radio. So which means if you're increasing the coverage, or if you start putting these radios in Starbucks, and so the people per radio uh, equation goes up. So earlier there was one person per radio, now there are 7 people per radio, 2 people per radio. That's when that would go on. Can you really see both these scenarios break my conclusion down? Right? So if these are my possible scenarios, then what are my assumptions? The new station should not increase my coverage by a whole lot, and people per radio should remain more or less the same. Again, you came up with both these assumptions. Can I please explain two? Absolutely, I can explain two. Okay. Now let's assume the constraint that we have is the number of radios remain unchanged. Okay. The person who said explain two, the number of radios remain unchanged. But what if those radios changed hands? What if those radios, some people, Starbucks bought some of those radios and put them in Starbucks stations, or those radios essentially cater to more people now. So in that case, the number of people, the conclusion is about the number of people receiving RDS programming, that would go up. Does that help understand? Does number 2 make sense? Got it? Okay, so Sylvia has a great question. He says, how do you choose the direction of falsification question? I struggle with trimming the falsification scenarios to those that really break the conclusion. Sylvia, we don't use who for scenarios, we use who for people. Sometimes I find myself digressing to plausible alternative explanations rather than falsification scenarios. Okay, I'll use the word keyword over here sometimes. So I'm going to actually answer yes to Sylvia's question, and I'm going to share that answer with everyone so you can read her question, because it's an excellent question. And so you guys should be able to read that question right about now. So first of all, does that happen with everyone? Because it should happen with everyone if you're doing things right. Does that happen with everyone? Or it will happen with all of you when you start doing pre-thinking, by the way. And it's a really great point. So if you're doing that, if it so happens that you digressed and you thought of a scenario which is not truly a falsification scenario, but which is built more around the strengthener, thank yourself. Why? Because that's an opportunity for you to learn. That's an opportunity for improvement. And again, remember, Sylvia used the word sometimes. Okay, there will always be some questions that would trick you into doing that. Those are the questions where you need to spend 10-15 minutes reviewing the answer choices, where you need to fill that error log. Okay, so that's something which is there, and those are the questions that you need to get good answers to. And if you don't get good answers to through your thought process, that's where you post them in our forum posts, and we'll respond to it and you will learn. Okay. The other point over here, which you see in the comments here, I was wondering, yes, part of process of learning, what happens in the context that's no longer true if the technology improved? Remember this, that's a good way of thinking, but you always have to maintain the constraints given over here, and the constraints are driven by this, which is to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radios. A lot of people, a lot of our former students who've gone to the business school and are now studying, are now working, they come back to me and say, hey, you remember Rajat, you talked about pre-thinking? We use that in consulting, we use that in proposals. And one of the key things when you do this is you have to provide the constraints. Otherwise, if you don't have the constraints, your claims can be broken very easily. So the same thing, and critical reasoning is built around that. So don't go around the constraints of the argument. That it's very easy to really say the constraint no longer holds true. And in real life, in some cases, that happens. But your claim still doesn't go wrong. Why? Because the claim is built assuming the constraint as a fact. So in a critical reasoning question, you will not breach your constraints. Does that make sense? So take constraints as sacred. You may not agree with them, but take them as sacred. Don't think the technology will improve. Okay. So let's kind of look at the answer choices here, and I'm going to again tilt my screen so I can write on the screen. Choice A, really complex answer, but the correct answer. I'm going to really show how you guys polled first, so you guys, because I don't think you guys would remember how you polled. RDS Technologies, here's how you guys polled. 24% or 16 of you chose choice A. Okay, so choice A is our correct answer. Let's kind of, it is in line with our pre-thinking, the range pre-thinking, the first pre-thinking. Choice A says, few if any of RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94 broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached. Or in simple words, few if any means all what they're saying is the new radio stations, they're not increasing the coverage. So, or in simple literal one-to-one translations, few if any means almost none. So this is 1 and this is 1 over here. Of the RDS equipped station, of the RDS radio station that began broadcasting after 94, that's 2. And which are the stations that began broadcasting after 94? These are the new radio stations. Okay, broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached. Okay, that's 3, and increasing the coverage, that is 3 over here. Okay. If you're not seeing the PPT, join again. If you're using a mobile internet connection, that will happen. Pretty much everyone else should be seeing the PPT. Can you guys see the PPT? And 1, 2, and 3, and 1, 2, and 3 over here. Yes, good. Yeah, if you're using a mobile connection, as I said, this is real-time audio. The moment I speak, within 100 milliseconds, you guys receive it, which is why I don't turn the video on. And if you're using a mobile connection, it's not designed for real-time audio and video transmission. You know, YouTube, Zoom, all of them do a lot of buffering. That's not real-time. Doesn't matter desktop or laptop, it's the connection. And trust me, as someone who made his first radio when I was 12 years old, using vacuum tubes, I know wireless technology. It's still, I say wireless runs in my blood. Yeah, just now in Wi-Fi, that technology is reliable enough for pure real-time communication. So this is my correct answer. This is the correct answer, and you can really see the translation. We'll do the negation test on this. This is the translated version. You negate this, you say almost none of the new radio stations increase the coverage of RDS programming. The negation of this is at least some of the new radio stations increase coverage. If at least some new radio stations increase coverage, then I as an author cannot say that the number of Verlanders receiving special program information has not increased significantly. Okay. All right, choice A clear. I'm going to look at every other answer choice too, but choice A clear. It's in line with our pre-thinking. Okay, choice B. You are going to help me understand why choice B is incorrect. Okay, let's look at, in terms of evaluating the answer choices, we first make sure we understand the concept that we are testing. In this case, we're talking about assumptions over here. Okay, what's the fundamental definition of an assumption? What's the fundamental definition? I asked you to write it down. It's an unstated idea that must hold true for the conclusion to hold true. Everyone remembers that definition? Okay, good. Now let's apply that definition into this. Let's look at this. What is my conclusion here? My conclusion here is that the number of Verlanders receiving special program information hasn't changed. What's my conclusion? Remember? In other words, we said if 1 million Verlanders we're receiving that special program information in 94, then that number in 96 is also 1 million. Remember that conclusion, right? 94 to 96. Okay. Now let's look at this statement. With that context in mind, let's look at this statement. This statement says in 1996, most Verlanders who lived within the listening area of an RDS station already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. What does the word most mean here? What does the word most mean? What is majority? More than 50%. Okay. So let's say it's not almost all, it's more than 50%. Okay. It could include all, it could include 90%, but it's not almost all. Okay. So let's say someone said 70% around. So let's take 70%. I like 70%. So what it's saying is that 70% of Verlanders who were within the listening area had a radio designed to equip RDS, or to receive RDS, I'm sorry. My question is this 70% required? Is this required? Is this required? Let's just make sure my E is okay. Or in other words, will this conclusion not hold true if 20% had an RDS radio in 94 and the same 20% had the RDS radio in 96? Do I need that 70% or do I need that most for that conclusion to hold true? Do I need the word most? Yes, no? No, we don't need that word most, right? If 20% had an RDS radio in 94 and the same, and 20% had it in 96, and that people per radio remain the same, no, we would not need. The conclusion will continue to hold true. Okay. Or in other words, if you had understood that conclusion, you would have said, hey, this conclusion is about the change in number of radios. It's not about the number of radios in 94 or the number of radios in 96. So if the conclusion is about the change in number, the absolutes shouldn't matter. Okay. People who chose choice B, what did you learn from it? People who chose choice B, what did you learn? Again, remember, this is a difficult question, difficult answer choices. It's a perfect storm. So there's a lot to learn. Always look for sneaky words. Visualize. It's the same thing. Visualize this answer choice and ask yourself, is this must be true? Do I need that 60%, that 70%? Do I need this word most over here? If you don't visualize an answer choice, it's bound to mess your brain up. It's bound to tempt you to choosing that answer choice. Okay. Let's look at choice C. Choice C says, what happens when you equip a radio station with RDS technology? Okay. Now, in my conclusion, what kind of programming do I care about? What kind of programming? Special programming or RDS programming, let's call it that way. Right? Now, what's if a radio station does not have RDS technology, then can it broadcast RDS programming? No, it cannot. Or in other words, for those of you who like mathematical translation, what's the range of RDS programming? Without the RDS technology there. What's the range of RDS programming? Without RDS technology, 0, right? So when you look at this answer choice and you say equipping a radio with RDS technology does not decrease the station's listening area, am I going to impact the range of RDS programming or non-RDS programming? What kind of programming is it impacting? Non-RDS, right? Because RDS doesn't have a range. And are we concerned about that programming? No. What if earlier a radio station had a range of 1 mile, or let's call it 1 kilometer, and now with for regular programming, and now we equip it with RDS technology and its range decreases to half a kilometer. Does that matter to my conclusion? No. Why? Because my conclusion is about people who receive RDS programming, not the other folks not the other kind of programming. Again, ask yourself, what is this conclusion about? And do I care about the impact? Is the impact bad? Yes. But is it bad on my conclusion? Absolutely no. If it doesn't impact my conclusion, why the hell do I care? Which, by the way, is also choice D, D for Delta. In 1996, Verlanders who did not own radios equipped to receive RDS. Do we care about people who don't have RDS radios? Do we care about them? No. Could not receive any programming. Do we care about any programming, or do we just care about RDS programming? Just RDS programming. So why is choice D wrong? Because we don't care about people who don't have the RDS radio. We don't care about any programming. Again, if you chose choice D, you did not focus on visualizing the conclusion as much as you should have. Or when you were evaluating this answer choice, you did not have that conclusion in mind. So what are you going to really just say? I'm going to really look at this and say, in the context of my conclusion, does that make sense? Do I care about this segment of people? e-GMAT students, we have in the pre-thinking set of files, we have something about segments, right? You have a pre-thinking file which addresses just segments. This kind of error is what it tries to avoid. You should think about segments of population here. Why? Because that visualization is really important to build. This is talking about a segment I don't care about. It cannot be my assumption. Does that make sense? And again, as I said, don't kill yourself for this question. There's the reason why this is here is because there's a lot of learning from this question. I did not expect any one of you to get this right, by the way. So that's why it's a great question. It's not our question, it's an official question. And don't say needs a lot of practice, but just really say, hey, I need to build that skill. And each answer choice helps you identify one weakness that will show up in one kind of question or not. So post this session, when you get the PDF, revise it. Okay, because you will learn a lot. There are things you can get from one question that will help you get 10 other questions right. This is that kind of question. This is 750 level. Both these questions are 750 level. That's another good question. For this question, shall we assume one listener is a single person, even though they may listen to multiple RDS programs? Yes, in the context of this conclusion, it's about the number of people who are receiving RDS programming. It's not about how much RDS programming they consume. Okay. Type of RDS programming doesn't make a difference. Okay, so that's there. Now let's go to this next question. Shelby will refuse very quickly. I'm already about within 5 minutes of my session end time. So Shelby will refuse. This is how you guys did. Choice D, 31%, choice C, 25%, and choice E, 14%. So this one again is a beautiful question. Okay, and the beauty lies in language. Once you understand that language, the answer, the pre-thinking is really, really clear. So let's go over here. What happened last year? We collected a bunch of refuse. We did not incinerate any. We burned everything. Okay. Let's assume one trash can is one truck. So how many trucks worth of refuse did we burn last year or incinerate last year? What's the count? Can you count the number of trash cans, please? 10, right? And for those of you who said incineration was a difficult word, again, you should have looked at residual ash. You can say burning or chemical reaction. It doesn't matter. So that's there. Now this year, what are we going to do? How many trash cans are we going to burn this year? Reduce it to 5. So this year, we're going to separate some for recycling and we're going to burn the rest. Now, here is my question here for you, and I'm going to put this as a poll question here. If instead of collecting the same amount of refuse as I did last year, if I collect 10x as much refuse, if I collect 10 times as much refuse, then how many trucks do you think will send for incineration this year? If I collect 10 times as much garbage. How many trucks will I send for incineration this year? Let's get the responses. 5, 4, 3, 2, come on, and 1. And this is a test of your ability to understand the argument. All right, so let me end the poll, broadcast the results, and you can really see only 20% of you chose 5. 5 is the correct answer. Okay, and a majority of you chose 50, or close to a majority of you chose 50. In fact, 50 plus 100 is about 70% of the entire group here. Now, why is it 5? Let's look at this. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. So when you read this, what the statement is saying is, it says regardless of how much garbage we collect, we're only going to send half as many trucks as we sent last year. Read that statement again and see, can you infer that? So if I sent 10 truckloads last year, this year, regardless of how much refuse I collect, I'm only going to send half as many truckloads as I sent last year. Okay, so even if I collect 10x as much refuse, you're still going to get 5 truckloads. Because I gave you, how do we know the initial number of trucks? Because I gave you 10 as the initial number of trucks. That was the context I provided. Others, can you see that? Can you see the beauty in language here and the importance of reading and not rushing through the argument? Okay, if you do this, if you read this properly, now let's think the argument's very clear. The conclusion is the ash generated would be half of what it was last year. So the question, the falsification question that I ask is, in what condition will the ash generated be more than 50%, given that I'm only sending half as many trucks for incineration? Okay. In what scenario will I generate more ash if I'm only getting half as many trucks? No, that's their assumption. What's the scenario in which I'll generate more ash? The scenario has to be opposite of that. Remember, this is a falsification scenario. Ash per truckload increases, yes. Okay. There's nothing about recycling here. This is very, very similar to that highway miles question. Don't go into cars, number of cars or number of trips. If each truckload generates more ash. See, that's the only thing. That's my possible scenario in which my conclusion breaks down, which means my assumption is ash per truckload is similar to or what it was last year. Is that clear to everyone? And can you also see the parallel to highway miles questions? Highway miles question talked about the number of trips. It talked about the distance traveled and toll per mile. Here it's talking about ash per truckload and refuse here. Okay. So let's look at answer choices here. Someone asked, can we have a scenario in which it's a must be true scenario, but it's not new information? And choice says exactly that. Choice says, this year, no materials that city services could separate for recycling be incinerated. Essentially, you want to make sure recyclable material is not incinerated. Why is this wrong? Because it doesn't provide any new information. You can infer this from the argument. Okay, whatever is separated is not sent for incineration. Okay. Cost is a material, so it doesn't matter. Let's look at choice C. It was the most popular answer choice. We actually addressed choice C.
Refuse collected by city services will contain a larger proportion of recyclable materials than it did last year. Does that matter given what we've done? Does that matter? If we only are sending half as many truckloads for incineration, the amount of recyclable material is immaterial. Right? Because it's given to us, we are sending half as many truckloads. People who chose choice C for cat, is that clear? Why in the context of this argument, this thing doesn't matter? Perfect. Choice D is my correct answer. It talks about ash per truckload, which is what we did in our pre-thinking. And if you do the negation test, refuse incinerated will generate more ash per truckload. That's a negated statement. What is the impact on the conclusion? It breaks the conclusion down. Why? Because even with half as many trucks, if each truckload is packed so tightly that it generates 50% more ash, then my conclusion that I'm going to generate half as much ash can no longer hold true. Okay. Let's look at choice E. Total quantity of refuse is immaterial. Why? Because I'm only going to send half as many truckloads. Again, let's apply the negation test. If the total quantity is greater, does it matter? No, because I'm only going to get 5 trucks or half as many trucks. All right. What did you learn? What were your takeaways? Can we do all this analysis in less than 2 minutes? Actually, a minute 45. Yes. Minute 45. You will not be able to do this in 2 minutes tomorrow. But in 20 arguments, if you spend 5 to 10 minutes on understanding each argument, you would see every argument is progressively easier. That's where you go through the free trial and try doing that. It's not just practice, it's a matter of perfecting. And perfecting the ability to visualize, perfecting the ability to formulate that falsification question, to read and translate that answer choice. And again, did you see any trick in all of this? No. There is no trick. Now, this is something I wanted to tell you. I mean, how many of you feel that when it comes to acing the GMAT, this is a test of time? Acing the GMAT is about timing. Okay. Now, definitely attend the strategy session next week and the geometry session. One thing that I will tell you is, of all the competitive exams that exist out here, because the GMAT's it's an adaptive test, it's the least impacted by timing. Okay. And this is something that's me telling you, a company that has delivered about 50% of all success on GMAT Club over the last decade, or 60% of all success or 700 plus scores in the last 1 year. Okay. So the GMAT's not a test of timing. The GMAT's a test of logical and a methodical thought process. And the beauty of this test is, out of 36 questions on verbal, if you answer 30 and you get, 25 of them right, you can still get an 80th percentile. That's not something that you can do on the GRE or the SAT. Which is tougher, GMAT or CAT? The GMAT's definitely tougher. I mean, people who score 99 percentile on CAT struggle on the GMAT. So the GMAT's definitely tougher. Okay. So where do you go next from here? So one thing is, this isn't rocket science over here. This is something that can help you be more accurate. This can help you waste time. Why? Because with this, you're not going to spend time doing back and forth between answer choices. Okay. Does GMAT not penalize if you take longer to answer? No. And for those of you who've been asking for the study plan, you can get it over here. All right. So how do you get to that 90th percentile? Here is what you need to do. Make sure you can classify statements, figure out what the main conclusion is. Once you get there, visualize that conclusion. All of these are pitfalls. If you fix those, you get better at it. Make sure you build that argument structure or the logical structure of the argument once you visualize the conclusion, and then do the same visualization with answer choices as well. Really important. Okay. Okay. Do all of those 4 things, you'd get the CR question right every time. Okay. So let's kind of see how you would improve. Now, one thing that I will tell you is, even when you become a 95th percentile test taker, you would still make mistakes. These are the scholarinium stats for a V44 student. You can really see for hard questions, they still make 30 to 35%. They still make mistakes on 30 to 35% of the question. That's where the opportunity to improve is. Now, medium, they're almost perfect. You don't have medium selected, you have hard selected over here. So that's something that's still there. So when it comes to hard questions, you know, every question where you make a mistake is an opportunity to learn. Okay. So fundamentals. First, go learn the fundamentals over here in the premise and conclusion files. Then go through these lessons on introduction to assumption, pre-thinking, logical gap, and 2 entities. I think we have segments as well for a short duration. Make sure you go solve those things. There are some really interesting practice questions here. Practice those. This is a part of your free trial. If you're a paid student, make sure you go towards comparisons, quant, go through the application files, go through the practice files. Really important that we get this done, because essentially with this, you will get ready to think and visualize all kinds of arguments, whether they're comparing entities, whether they're talking about segments, whether we are comparing both entities and segments together, whether they're quant focused arguments. And once you do that, once you build that ability to visualize and pre-think, then evaluate becomes very easy, then strengthen and weaken becomes easy, and then boldface becomes super easy or so. So really important that you do this properly. Okay. And you learn all 4 skills through these files or so. Here's a guy who actually, I think, just got into TUC. He says, as someone who taught physics at an undergraduate level, I thought, he'd do really well in critical reasoning, but he messed it up. That's why he got a 570. But then once he learned pre-thinking, he was able to improve his CR ability, which is a big contributor in him improving to 740. Okay. Again, start your pre-thinking journey with these lessons over here. And with that, let me actually share the session PDF with you. So here's the session PDF, top left-hand corner. So that's really good. You can download the session PDF. Again, let me reduce this over here, and so that I can share a few other things as well. So here's the study plan piece over here, and then I'm going to share tomorrow's session, which Harsha is going to host. Okay. So in terms of this, Ravi says official guide versus e-GMAT. Is it a good idea to skip the official guide and focus just on e-GMAT? So the way I talk about this, Ravi, is, the official guide has just practice questions, and those questions are still worthy. What we recommend our students is go through the e-GMAT course, make sure you do cementing, and once you're done with cementing, then start from the medium hard to hard questions. So if you have the latest official guide or any official guide beyond OG 2020, the questions are sequenced in the difficulty order. So the later questions are more challenging. So I recommend them to do the last 40% of the question, about I think 120 questions in the official guide. So essentially about the last 50 questions is what I recommend that they focus on. That once and only once they've done cementing, not before that. Okay. DK has a question, online versus in-center testing. DK, what's the question? What's the difference? What's the question that you have of online versus in-center testing? Um, and again, on our YouTube channel there are a couple of videos. Sandeep, if you can share those videos over there, that's something. Oh, difficulty, is the difficulty different? No, it's not. They're the same tests, same averages. No, we've had people who've done 770, 780s on both kinds of tests. Is it worth purchasing the official verbal or quant review? So I tell people, if you have to purchase one book other than the e-GMAT course, purchase the OG Advanced. We really love the OG Advanced. So that's something that we would love. Okay. OG Advanced, yes, OG Advanced. If you Google OG Advanced, you'd get to it. And Sandeep, if you can provide a link to that as well, that'd be great. Do you recommend online GMAT or in-center? Again, if you go to e-GMAT's YouTube channel, you'd see my recommendation here with a lot of justification. I also have a video. As I said, I'm a wireless guy, so on how to reduce or minimize interruptions during your online GMAT. Okay. So which one do I recommend? So it depends on your personal scenario. So I'm someone who's very territorial. I like working on my desk. I like the setup of my desk, and I have a very good internet connection at home. So for me, I would go in for the online GMAT that way. Now, the only reason for me to not go for the online GMAT, again, for someone like me who has a very reliable connection, my computers are good, to not go for the online GMAT is because it still doesn't provide the ESR. Now, if your situation is different, if you live in an environment where you'd hear a lot of noise from outside, then, or if you don't have as reliable an internet connection, and remember, the way to check reliability is to run GoToMeeting on your on your machine for a good hour and a half. Okay, because that's kind of the infrastructure that the enhanced online GMAT uses. If that can run reliably with your video running, because you're looking at a 2 megabit per second upload speed, then you think you're all set for it. Okay. So that's kind of my consideration. Now, if you need headphones, you've got to go in center, because on the online GMAT, you can't wear headphones. Okay. Will this session be available on YouTube? We'll be sharing the recording on this. I might upload this on YouTube, but yes, there is a version of this session that already exists on our YouTube channel, and if you've not subscribed, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel over here in the middle flow. Okay. If there were a couple of questions over here, there's this question about Indian B schools versus US B schools. Again, if you're looking for the best management education, I still believe that top 20 schools in the US are better than ISB, but ISB, if you want to study just in India, is probably way better than the IIMs. Not that IIMs are bad, just comparing one versus the other. Okay. Admits and scholarships. In terms of admits and scholarships, if you go to our admits and scholarships page, we actually did this research last year where we contacted about 500 of our students, and what we found was, if you're looking for a significant scholarship, aim for a score of 740 or higher. If you have a 740 or higher and with a reasonably good profile, then in a school which is ranked 25th to 30th, you can get anywhere between a 50% to a full ride. In schools ranked, outside of M7 to 25th, you can get about $40,000 to $50,000 worth of scholarship, which is tremendous. But the other beauty of this is that a lot of these schools also offer their own financing programs. So even when you take loans, you actually get a loan at like 3 or 4% interest rate, which it's phenomenal, by the way. And then if you go to M7 programs, even if frankly, you have to take loans, as the ROI is just so high, it doesn't matter. But get to that 740 plus score. With the 740 plus score, what we've found is that the likelihood of of getting to an M7 or a top 20 school increases about 4x. It's still at about 40%, but without a 740 plus score, you're looking at 9 to 10%. Okay. All right, guys. With that, I want to thank you everyone for joining today. It was wonderful to have you guys on. If you have any other question, let me know. Not done maths or quant in 5 years, what would you suggest? Start with the e-GMAT quant basics course. You shouldn't need anything else, by the way. Yeah, we teach everything from how to solve the fundamental equations to how to solve the most challenging probability questions. So one thing that a lot of people don't recognize is, good online courses today are way more comprehensive than books. For example, in our course, because we have a lot of personalization and tech built into it, we can add a ton of content there and ensure that if you need content, you would watch it or you would be served that content. But if you already have that ability, we can reduce the length or increase the length of your courses. So which, by the way, you can't do in a book. So that's something that's there. Does this recommended score apply for scholarships in the European business schools as well? So European business schools are very different from the Indian ones or from the US ones. So European business schools, the INSEAD, IMD, LBS, 3 business, IESC, the 4 schools that I really, really like. There, once you get to that 727, 30 score, they look at your profile way more deeply than anything else, which again, so what I'm really saying is 730, you get there, then 730 to 750 incremental value is not as much. I'm not saying it's zero, it's not as much as it is in the US business schools. That's one piece. The other piece is they have very little budget for scholarships. So yeah, I mean, again, you get into these 4, I wouldn't worry about scholarships. Just the ROI is so high over there. For a guy who has 3 years of experience in keyword testing, what would you recommend, CAT or GMAT? That's a question I can't answer. It just depends on what your goals are. If you want to essentially, if you're aiming for top schools, you would study the GMAT. You take the GMAT. Why? Because it helps you get into the IIMs as well as the ISB and other top schools. CAT, in my opinion, I mean, yes, you get the IIMs for their full-time programs, but then beyond that, in terms of high quality education, your options are very, very limited. So it just depends on again what you want. And if you look at we again on our YouTube channel, we had Seher Khanna, who's the communications leader for the GMAC. She held a session for us and for our students 2 years back. She talks about the opportunities with the GMAT. Sandeep, if you can share that, that'd be wonderful. Okay, that's what my recommendation is. Again, CAT's cheaper, a lot cheaper. I think it costs what, 1,500 to 2,000 rupees. But in terms of the ROI, I don't look at the cost of anything. I look at the value that one provides, and value is the difference between the benefit that I get minus the cost. I think the GMAT gives way more value, especially because A, the test is standardized, B, the score is valid for 5 years, and C, the score's actually valid forever because you always put it on your resume. Okay, where will you get it? If you go to YouTube and e-GMAT and you say, if you say value of GMAT or GMAT opportunities, that's something that can tell you. Is the e-GMAT course designed for a beginner or a pro level student? It's designed for both. I think that's the beauty of good online courses. I mean, we've invested upwards of $10 million building technology, and that the benefit of that is that you can serve a variety of segments through this. For example, in our quant course, we have throughout the course about 35 diagnostics, and each diagnostic decides, it's built at a module level, and it decides how much of the module do you need to do. Let me just share that with you. So if you look at below the GMAT study plan, I'm going to share a link. You should be able to get to, it says space learning architecture. You can see that. Okay. Is it worth doing an EMBA? So if you're asking that question, then and again, if you're in India, that's very different. In the US, most people don't ask this question. Why? Because in the US, people who do an EMBA are folks who are already at a fairly high position in their organization, and they understand that there are certain skills that that they need to build, and an EMBA provides those skills. In India, when you look at an EMBA, which is, I think, something that is pretty much a full-time MBA that IIMs have cropped up for experienced professionals, that's much more like I think a 1 year long full-time MBA. And so if you need an MBA, it's a good option. Again, look at the placements over there. And so the answer depends on where you are versus what the MBA offers. If you have 5 years of experience, you're not making a ton of money, then that would be a really good ROI. But let's say 5 years of experience, if you're someone who's already making in India 20 to 25 lakhs, then that probably would not be worth it. What are your chances for an MBA if you have over 8 years of experience in coal industry and finance? Well, coal industry in finance, I didn't get that, but lots of people in oil and gas, from oil and gas or from the energy sector, do really well. So let me just go. So if you read, again, guys, if you put those questions in the Q&A pod, I can share links. Otherwise, I'm sharing. I'm hard pressed to share links over here. So if you see how to get into Colombia, if you open this link, Nishan, the guy who's there, he is from an oil and gas background. Again, you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see many people from the energy sector who've gotten into top B schools, and he has about 6 to 7 years of experience as well. What about MBA colleges like Rotman or McGill? If someone scores a 720, is it worth investing in these MBA programs? And what are the scholarship scenarios? So I don't think Canadian business schools, at least I'm not aware of, that they offer a ton of scholarship money. And again, the reason is because they don't have a lot of endowment money to offer scholarships from. US business schools have way more endowment money. Are these schools worth it? If you want to live in Canada, they're some of the best schools. But if you, and so this is for me, much more of a Canada versus a US kind of decision. And so I think that's the first decision that you need to have. If you want to live in the US, if you like the US lifestyle more than the Canadian lifestyle, then definitely don't go for these schools. But if you want to live in Canada, they provide a really good option. Okay. Any other question? Are Australia's business schools good for finance? There are a couple of those that are good that are good, not all. There are lots of, and again, in every country that's the case, by the way. But in the US, for example, the top 40 schools, I handedly, I mean, they're really good schools there. I recommend those. In Australia, there'll probably be about 4 to 5 schools that I'd recommend, no more than that. Again, a lot of it depends on essentially your where you want to stay and the kind of industry you want to work in post your MBA. Okay. All right, guys. I hope that's useful. I'm gonna actually clear the short answer pod, or actually let it be there because I don't see any questions that I've not answered. So leadership question. All right. I actually wrote an article. Let me get the article. It's an article that I co-authored with one of our partners, Poonam Tandon, long time ago. So this is the one. You should see it come over here. How to show leadership when you don't have reporting capabilities. If you click on it, you'd be able to get to it. And so there's also a couple of videos on our YouTube channel that you can watch. So here's an interview session that I did with students from Harvard, Stanford, and I think Wharton, and in which I talked about how to portray leadership. So here is the session. You can watch that and really see how to portray leadership. What does leadership mean? Leadership is not about reporting. You can have 20 people reporting to you, but you just be their manager and not a leader. Leadership is very different from having people report to you. Okay, hopefully that helps you. Watch this video. That I really like the video, also the article that Poonam and I co-authored. So definitely take a look at both these things. All your questions about leadership, you get good answers to those. Okay. All right, guys. With that, I want to thank you for joining me today. It was excellent having you guys over, and I look forward to seeing you guys on tomorrow's webinar, and B on doing accessing the concepts in the free trial. And those of you who access concepts, Harsha and I plan to create a couple of questions and we'll share those questions with you. So these will be fresh questions that we'll create with good detailed solutions or so. So thank you. And as I always say, happy learning.